All right. We're getting started here. We're just going to give people a couple more minutes to start rolling in. For some of those lazy folks or folks who are maybe just running in the door, getting off of work, but the numbers are stacking up quickly. So we'll kick her off here in just a couple seconds. All right, so for everybody who is rolling in so far, I just started a poll. So if you want to engage with that, that'd be cool. Something kind of fun that we're adding for this hunt class, but you should be able to find that there somewhere in your menu bar. You should see that poll has started. So go ahead and check it out. And just remember that we will be running a live chat that's available for everybody. So if you want to ask any questions or just chat amongst each other about anything that we're talking about here, you can do that right there in the live chat. But I think we'll get this thing kicked off. So the topic of tonight's hunt class is advanced trail camera tactics for whitetails. We got a lot of information coming at you guys tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Obviously, if you're here, it's because you want to get, more advanced trail camera information versus just learning how to turn them on and throw them out there. And that's exactly what we're going to get into. So start off with an introduction here. My name is Josh Dalkey. I am the content director for Huntstand. Been in outdoor media for 14 years. And most importantly, I'm a deer hunter like everybody else who's here. So I'm equally excited for this class tonight because as I'll get into here, I think I've still got a lot to learn with my trail camera game, and Mr. Josh Honeycutt will be helping us out with that tonight. So Huntstand, for those of you who are not familiar, is the #1 hunting and land management app. We're very proud of the product that we have and the community that we've built. That includes everybody who is on this hunt class this evening. It is hands down the best mapping app and hunt planning app for hunters and especially for whitetail hunters. And that's because we have a tier of Huntstand called Huntstand Pro Whitetail. And with that, you get some very unique features specific to whitetail hunting. We've got a whitetail habitat map that spans the entire country. It makes it easier to find applicable whitetail habitat when you're e-scouting. We've got crop history. We've got monthly satellite imagery. And the thing that we're probably the most proud of is our whitetail activity forecast that was developed primarily by Brian Murphy. He's our in-house whitetail biologist. This took over a year to develop, and I can say unequivocally that it is the most accurate whitetail activity forecast that you're going to find anywhere, without a doubt. Our algorithm is all based on real science, real data, real information, not just not some of the stuff that maybe your Uncle Bill likes to tell you that he's seen over the years and when deer should be moving or what the moon is going to do for deer movement. This is based off of real science and real data, and even down to the county level and individual deer herd level in some cases, for, I believe, well, very close to 100% of the whitetails range in the United States. So I highly encourage you guys to check out Huntstand Pro Whitetail. It really is a game changer for when you're trying to maximize your time out there and make sure you're in the field at the right time to take advantage of that whitetail movement. And the other way that you can do that, of course, is with using trail cameras effectively. So that's what we're going to get into this evening. So I'll stop on my Huntstand plug, but I can tell you right now, we're really proud of what we have. And we thank all you guys for being loyal and active users. And we've got some really cool things coming down the pike here that I can't talk about yet, but you'll be hearing about real soon, within the next week or two, probably. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But as we transition into the trail camera conversation here, the last thing I will say about Huntstand is we are very proud to have partnered with the Command Pro app, which is the app that you can use to manage your stealth cam and muddy cellular trail cameras. And what we've done is we've integrated the Command Pro app into Huntstand to the degree that you can actually see all your trail camera placements, all your cell camera placements, I should specify, on the Huntstand map for all your stealth cam and muddy cellular trail cameras. So while you're in there doing all your e-scouting and all your mapping in Huntstand, you can see where all your cell cams are at, and you can view the images directly within Huntstand without even having to leave the app. So that is a really powerful feature. We'll talk more about that this evening, but if you haven't already checked that out, please check it out. It's available in all the different tiers of Huntstand. And I can tell you that I use it like crazy. It just makes it a lot easier to see everything all in one place. So check out that integration. Now, I'm going to lead this with just a short story. I know Josh is going to have one later of his own that goes into a lot more detail, but the reason I wanted to start with this story, my own personal story, is because admittedly, I've been whitetail hunting since I was about 9 or 10 years old. So, we're talking 24, 25-ish years now at this point. And my whitetail hunting has taken me all over the country. I've even been down into Sonora, Mexico to go after Coues deer. So whitetail hunting has become a pivotal and like very, very important sacred part of my life. As I get older, I figured maybe it would start to die off, and it's doing the opposite. It's actually just getting stronger and stronger and stronger every year. And I can tell you that getting into trail cameras is one of the reasons why my whitetail hunting addiction continues to grow, because dang it, trail cameras are addicting, sometimes to a fault. But I was kind of just running trail cameras here and there, not with much strategy, more so just for fun for a number of years. And then probably 5 or 6 years ago, I started doubling down on my trail camera efforts. And then, of course, with the advent of cell cams and how great those have gotten, I'm pretty much running all cellular trail cameras at this point. I still got a couple of the old SD cameras out there that you got to go out and pull cards on. But at this point, there's really no reason to use those. So I've refined my techniques. I've had some success from cell cams, and it's definitely become a key part of my hunting strategy. And as a result, in 2022, at my family's farm in central Minnesota, where I grew up whitetail hunting, and I still do a lot of my deer hunting today. In 2022, I got a couple pictures of a very, very nice buck for that area. Just a great deer, but could tell that he's, could use a couple years to grow. But the problem is in that area, it's very difficult for that because people aren't huge into whitetail management. It's kind of a brown it's down mentality still, which is totally fine, to each their own. But that's just the reality of that area. So I was very excited to learn or discover in 2023 that deer had survived. And in fact, its core area was in the center of my family's farm. And the way I was able to identify that was strictly from trail camera intel. I never would have known this deer existed in the first place because we never saw him in person. And I definitely wouldn't have known that he lived to make it another year. And I certainly would not have been able to narrow down his core area to the point that I was able to, where I was confident in a 200-yard radius where this deer was spending the vast majority of his time and doing most of his bedding. And so by identifying that core area and using Huntstand and playing my cards right, I was able to end up killing that deer during firearm season. I did a hang and hunt one morning because the wind was wrong for one of the spots I wanted to get into, but I was still close enough that I caught him slipping that morning. And it might not say much to a lot of you. I'm sure there's some big buck killers on this hunt class tonight, but this is my biggest whitetail to date. And it was really special to me because I did it at my family's farm, and it still is the biggest deer I have seen in that area on trail camera or otherwise. And I have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of deer up at my family's farm over the years. Actually, every year I was out there during turkey season, and I went for a drive one evening and the deer density is so thick that I saw 210 deer in May in one evening. If that tells you anything. So that's also probably part of the reason why a lot of these deer up there don't grow to be giants. But this deer defied the odds. He survived, and I was fortunate to take him. So I just wanted to share that quick story before we roll into this, because without trail cameras, I'm not ashamed to admit that I almost certainly, unless I got lucky, there's no way I would have connected with this deer, let alone be able to actually hunt him with a purpose. So that was a lot of fun. Don't have anything like him on camera yet this year, and I'm running 25 cameras on 4 different properties, and I can tell you that big bucks, some parts of the country, they might be a little more common, but the reality is, guys, they're not a dime a dozen. It's hard for a deer to get over 3 years old just about anywhere. And so don't get down and out if you feel like all you're seeing is small bucks, quote unquote, small or small rack bucks, or bucks that just don't get up into those upper age classes, because that is the reality for a lot of us. There are some great areas and there are areas that are more management intensive, but just know if you're a guy like me who's been hunting on the same farm for 20 some years, these things aren't a dime a dozen. So just have fun with it, enjoy your hunt, and see if you can use trail cameras to improve your odds a little bit. And with that, I want to introduce our special guest, Josh Honeycutt. He is our executive editor at huntstand.com. So whenever you check out all of our field notes content, a lot of that stuff is coming from Josh. All of it is being posted by Josh and edited by Josh. He's been with us for a long time now. He's been my friend for a long time. We actually met on a whitetail hunt in South Dakota many years ago where we had some success. And Josh has just been all over the map with his deer hunting and also with his content. He's a national contributor to just about every magazine that's worth a damn. He's done a lot of video content for Midwest Whitetail and several other properties. He does a lot of video content for Huntstand. And of course, the last thing on that list and why we're all here tonight, he's a deer hunter. He's a hardcore deer hunter, one of the best ones I know. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Honeycutt.
Well, I appreciate that. Excuse me. I will apologize. I'm a little bit under the weather, so if I have to cough, I'll mute myself. But I am not a great deer hunter. I consider myself an okay deer hunter, but I do it a lot, and so I've figured out a lot of ways to fail. And so hopefully you guys can maybe learn something for some of my failures tonight. But likewise, I'm not like I said, I'm not an expert hunter. I have not learned it all. I still have a lot to learn myself. And so, like you said, there's a lot of big buck killers in this thread tonight, I'm sure. And so, if there's anybody out there that has some really good advice themselves, I'll be looking at the comments. So I appreciate it if you guys could teach me something as well, because I'm a student of deer hunting and a student of the whitetail. And so if there's any really cool advice that comes to y'all's mind out there, I'd love to hear it. This is a trail camera tactic, HuntClass. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And trail cameras have become a really integral part of what I do every single year. And so, just a quick overview of what we'll be discussing. We'll be talking about common trail camera mistakes, advanced trail camera troubleshooting, some best spots for trail camera locations, deploying a 360 trail camera, which is, new to stealth cam, new from stealth cam this year. Deep dives on trail camera intel and what you can glean from your photos, some advanced tactics for your trail camera deployments. And then again, like we just heard from Mr. Dawkey's hunt from last year. That's a heck of a deer and just a really cool deer. Look, I mean, the mass on that buck's beams was incredible. Just as pretty a 10-pointer as you'll ever see. But I'll have a real life example of my own at the end, and we'll kind of go into some of the details on that maybe if we have time, and maybe hopefully everybody out here can get a little something from that. And if you see my hand swipe across the screen, I promise you I'm not fritzing out. There's a fly that's everywhere in here. I've been hunting him all day. Might have to put a trail camera out for him, figure him out. We'll get him eventually. All right. Just starting out, and I know, Mr. Doc, we're gonna be doing a lot of back and forth here. So, slap me in the face, digitally, and tell me to hush if you got something to say. But there's a lot of common trail camera mistakes out there. Installing SD cards with a very high write speed is one of those. Now, if you're doing videography, like Josh said, him and I, we do a lot of videography work too. And, you want SD cards with high write speeds if you're doing videography work, because that's going to ensure that you're getting a quality product and you're not going to have an SD card failure. Now, you want quality SD cards with your trail cameras too, but in my experience, if you go with really, really high SD card write speeds, sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, tell me if you've had similar experiences, that it can actually potentially cause issues, and at worst, and at best, you're wasting money.
Yeah, for sure. What I've found is when you find one that works, just buy 100 of them. I mean, because they can be finicky, and the right speed is definitely an issue to consider. But it also seems like, man, there's certain ones that I've just had better luck with than others. I run the HME 32 gig cards right now. Um, and I've had really good luck with those, so I'm sticking with them. But there's a lot of good ones out there, and I'm sure you're going to get to it. But when it comes to not only write speeds but also capacity, you got to be real careful with that.
Yeah, I think personally, I've tried to keep, don't not usually I don't go over that 100 megabyte per second write speed. If you get up to like 120, 150 megabyte per second, I mean, you're getting into some really high quality cards there, and you're spending a lot of money. And so, for one, you don't need to spend that much money. Save some of that money and buy a few more cameras instead. You're going to get more bang for your buck as far as budget goes. But yeah, 32 gigabyte capacity is pretty much where I'm at with all of my cameras now. I think I have because I have so many cameras like you and like others here, I'm sure. I think I still run some 16s, as some of my backup cards if I need to go swap something out, because I do have some SD card cameras that I still run, and so I'll run some 8 gig or some 16 gig cards in those. But yeah, for cell cameras, I think it's a really good idea to go with a 32 gigabyte. Another mistake is installing some micro SD cards, with their adapters in full SD card slots. They'll probably work 99% of the time, but you don't want it to fail on you that 1%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is. And so if it's a full SD card slot, buy a full regular sized SD card for that camera. It's just not worth the risk. Again, it's probably going to work. If you're using a micro with an adapter, it's probably going to work. But again, it's about eliminating potential issues, not trying to, that way you don't have to resolve an issue when it does come.
On the size thing too. Sorry, I was trying to answer some messages here, but I think you might have said it. If not, most cameras will not accept anything above 32. So you just really got to be careful with that. I've made that mistake, and it's unfortunate when you go to all that work to get your cameras out there and you realize that they're not working because of something stupid like that. So I know there are a few out there that will take 64s or bigger, but most of them are 32 or less. And it should always say it in the user manual. So always double check that. I mean, if it'll take a higher capacity card, great, do it. But if it won't, then it won't at all, and it just won't work. So be careful with that.
Yeah, for sure. Likewise, a similar mistake is using SD cards in multiple devices. So it's definitely an issue, can be an issue if you're running with completely different devices. So like you're trying to use swapping SD cards between trail cameras and maybe your family camera that you use for taking photos around the house. That's a big mistake. Because a lot of the times the formatting is going to be off. But I don't even like to use the same SD cards within different devices from a trail camera perspective. So one good thing that I prefer to do to make sure, if to keep myself from doing something like that, is to mark my cameras and mark my SD cards with a unique identifying number or something. That way there are some way for me to make sure that, okay, I've got SD card A, SD card B goes with camera 10 or whatever it is. That way I have a regular card, and a backup card for each camera device. Now, you don't have to do that, but it is a good practice. And if you're running SD style cameras still, usually you're going to want to have 2 cards for every camera anyway. So why not have 2 cards for every cell cam? but that, yeah, that's just something else to think about as well. Try to make sure you have your dedicated SD cards for each particular camera that you've got. That way you're not swapping between devices, because the formatting, if you format the card and you use it with a different, it's probably going to work most of the time just fine. But again, we're talking about preventing potential issues. They aren't always issues, but they can become issues. Again, and on that point, not formatting SD cards on before you use them. You want to make sure you format cards before you insert those into the device. Make sure it is completely cleared out. Fortunately, with like StealthCam and other things, you can format that card remotely through the app. And that is a huge benefit that it obviously is available. So that's something to think about as well. Using poor antenna positioning. Make sure that you've got good quality service for one, but then you want to make sure that everything is set up properly. And so there's multiple reasons why. So if you've got your antenna, in a good proper positioning, you're going to have a little bit better signal probably. But it's also about preventing damage to the camera. Because raccoons, squirrels, birds, everything's going to be on top of those cameras at some point. And if you don't have an idea, because a lot of these cameras now have breakaway points, and so you want to think about the positioning of that antenna. That way, if something does climb on top of it, that it's oriented in a manner where it's less likely to do any kind of damage to it. Because while it's been a long time since I've had any kind of damage to an antenna, before I started kind of thinking about, okay, how is that antenna positioned in that breakaway point position, again, it was very rare, but there were instances years ago where I had some damage to those. So there's multiple elements to antenna positioning, but you want to think about that as well. Not using external power sources. This is a big one. And so we're fortunate, because I use stealth cams. Excuse me, I'm spitting all over the screen. Stealth cams, Wild Games, Muddies. Those are the three cameras that I run, and they have a really good battery life. They really do. A lot of my cameras do not have external, battery sources, like whether that be, just a battery box or a solar panel or a combination of the two. But a lot of them are. And there's a lot of reasons why I advocate for that. The reasons why I prefer to do that. For one, the best advantage of a cell camera, in my opinion, is the real-time intel. Like Josh was saying earlier, he was getting all that real-time intel that, on that deer he was hunting. And, it was, I'm sure it give him a little, I know it give him a better opportunity to harvest that deer, because cell cameras do the same thing for me whenever I'm hunting a particular deer. But if you don't have these external battery sources, you will have shorter battery life. It might still be really good, comparatively speaking to another camera that's just on, internal batteries alone. But whenever you pair that external battery source, it just extends it even more. And so you continue to get that real-time intel without having to go and replace batteries. And again, like we said, I don't know if we said this yet or not, but another huge benefit to cell cameras over SD style cameras is you don't have to go in there and pull cards. But if you're having to go in there and replace batteries every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 months, whatever it ends up being, situation depending, it kind of defeats the purposes of keeping that pressure down, because you're still even though you don't have to go in there to pull cards to see what's on the camera, you've got to go back in there to replace the batteries. And so not using external power sources is a big mistake, in my opinion. I always advocate, if you've got the budget for it, to go ahead and get either a camera that you like, that maybe it comes in a package scenario where you can get the camera and the external battery source with it. And if you can't, go out and buy it individually, in addition to it. But having that external source of power is huge. And a lot of my cameras that I deploy, when I pair that external battery source, whether that be a good quality battery box, that maybe it's just a battery box, maybe it's a battery box with an integrated solar panel, maybe it's just a dedicated solar panel, but a lot of times you can get all season use out of that, and you don't ever have to go back in and actually replace the AA batteries that's in the internal parts of the camera. And when you think about it, you actually end up saving money, or at least getting your money back out, because AA batteries aren't cheap. And it's like everything else, inflation is ridiculous. And so if you think about, if you're planning on using that camera all season long, depending on how the conditions, if it's really cold, obviously it saps the batteries a little quicker. But if you have those external battery packs on those cameras and you get that full season or close to a full season or even beyond a full season use out of that, you're actually going to, especially if you think about the solar panels and if you put those in positions where they're feeding the, proper power, you're going to make your money back or, very quickly as far as battery placement, batteries go. So like I said, inflation has went up. Double A's aren't cheap. And so you'll make your money back, especially when you factor in gas money going to the farm to put double A's back into the camera. So it's a no-brainer. If you're going to get a cell camera, get external battery sources to go with those cameras. And I'm not just trying to sell product. That is 100% going to save you money.
Yeah, Josh, let me weigh in on that a little bit. It's good that you went into so much depth there on the battery and power source thing because we actually had several questions in the chat. I know you're not looking at the live chat right now because you don't have two sets of eyeballs, but I'm glad you went in depth on that. And to kind of compound on what you were saying, it's the irony is I just had an outfitter hit me up yesterday asking me about that kind of stuff. And he's like, man, are you running lithium? He's like, I just can't stomach the price and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I am. And it is a lot to bite off. So I'm running lithium double A's in combination with external power sources. I'm trying to run external power sources on all of my cameras. I'm trying to make that conversion right now. A lot of what I'm doing right now are the rechargeable solar packs like you talked about. What's nice about those is they start with a full charge and then, it's pretty, you don't have to have a whole lot of sunlight for those things to stay near a full charge all the time once you put them out there. And then, that and the internal double A's will work together. So, when one isn't picking up the weight, the other one will pick up the slack. So definitely agree with you on the external power sources. And it's like, if you're going to run cell cams, probably the biggest advantage is that if you set them up properly, you should not have to go out there ever. And like the story I started with, the buck I killed last year, if I would have had to go in there and check cards even a few times, I'm very, very concerned that hunt would have been compromised because he was just there. So yeah, just using those, it can be a lot to bite off. Whether you're buying lithium double A's or whether you're buying external or both, because the upfront price tag does feel like a lot, but what you're gonna save over time and frustration, and like you said, gas money and all that kind of stuff, it just outweighs it. And Stealth Cam has some sweet products. We've got solar products with that partner, and then also some new lithium rechargeable external power sources and cartridges that'll go in and completely replace the double A's. But if you don't go with one of those options and you just want to get lithium double A's, I can personally recommend there's a company on Amazon called Bevigor, Bevigor, that sells lithium double A's because there's Energizer, and then there's like two other sources that sell lithium double A's, and that's it. And that Bevigor is one of them. So I buy those in bulk. They got kind of like a red logo or red label on them. Usually go in on them with my buddies. So I'll buy like $500 worth at a time. We'll split the cost. We'll split the battery. Should get the lowest per unit price that we can. I've been using those for 3 years and I've had really good luck with them. So a little bit cheaper than Energizer, but they seem to work really well. So let's move on to your corrosion point here. I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of cameras get killed from corrosion these days, but it's because I pay attention to that. Back in the day, of course, you don't have this issue with the stealth cams. At least I don't, because these stealth cams and the muddies and even the law games, they're housing on them is really good quality, and so you don't have to worry about quite as much moisture and stuff like that. But in the past, I dealt with a lot of corrosion. And again, there's a lot of issues, batteries, moisture, leaving cameras out there. Ants is a big one. It's like every time an ant gets in a camera, it's like the corrosion happens. And I don't know if the ants are pooping battery acid or what they're doing, but it just messes with them. But yeah, if you just keep Maintenance is huge. If you have conduct regular maintenance, and that's really what it's all about, conduct regular maintenance on your trail cameras. That's going to ensure that the longevity is good, that the lifespan increases. If you do happen to see any corrosion on the internal components, the battery the contact points in the battery compartments, just clean them up. Obviously, wear gloves, but clean those up, because if you allow corrosion to take over, it's eventually going to kill the camera.
It's funny you brought up the ants thing, because I actually haven't had that problem and I didn't know about that, but there's somebody on here who had another question. M. Capola, I don't know if it's a male or a female, but they asked, keeping insects out of a security box for your trail camera. He was looking for advice for that, and he mentioned ants being a problem, or he or she, I don't know who it was. I didn't know ants were a problem with corrosion, but since this question came in, it's somewhat related. There were a couple questions here related to cable locks versus lock boxes, especially for public land, and what you prefer. You got anything on that?
Yeah, I used to lock even on public land all of my cameras. I don't lock any cameras anymore. If somebody's going to steal it, they're going to steal it. The problem with lock boxes is you can't technically. It's really difficult to use a lock box on public land, because for one, you're not allowed to screw any kind of object in. On most public properties, you're not allowed to screw an object like a tree hanger, bow hanger, like the screws you would use in a lockbox. You're not permitted legally to do that. So it's really difficult unless it's a special type of lockbox that I'm not familiar with. It was maybe designed for public land. I don't think there's a public land dedicated lockbox out there. Now every public land is different, so you might find a piece of public land that allows you to do that. But I mean, technically, you're not even supposed to clear a shooting lane on public lands. You're not supposed to snap over a sapling or cut a branch. To that point, though, if you need to do that, what I like to do on public land is completely unrelated, but I like to keep some rope, small rope. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. In my pack, and if I have like a limb that's in the way, I'll just actually take a piece of rope, tie it around the limb, pull it down, tie it off. It doesn't break, doesn't damage it, but then it kind of helps me clear out my shooting lanes. So completely unrelated note, but it might save you some trouble or from getting in trouble with maybe a conservation officer if they see you out there sawing limbs. But as far as keeping people from seeing your cameras, like if you're worried about theft, hanging them up high. So hang them up high, point them down. So when you're putting them out on public land trail cameras, take some sticks with you and take a safety harness. 2 sticks, probably do it. Might even be able to do it with 1 stick if you're tall. But just hang those cameras up high, make a mock scrape down below it. That way, you've got something, to see. Or if it's like a natural creek crossing or something, you need a focal point, especially since you don't have that typical field of view with if it's down low looking parallel to the ground. If you're hanging it up high looking down, you have a much smaller target area. So you need a mock scrape, real scrape, crossing, trail crossing, something. But that gets it out of a line of sight for most people if they're walking around. Something else that I prefer to do too is, again, you can't use the screw in method. You can't use a screw, but instead of the strap that comes with the camera, a good thing to do is to use a small piece of rope, black or brown rope, preferably brown, because it's going to be around the tree trunk more than likely. Nothing wrong with the straps. The straps that are great, but a little piece of nylon rope or something like that's much smaller profile. It's not going to be as noticeable to the eye, because if you think about it, on public land, that strap is what catches the eye, not the camera, because the strap is visible 360. They might not even see the camera, but they can see the strap. So if you replace that strap with just a thin piece of rope, something that's strong, and I am having the biggest blank right now. Help me out, Josh. What is the type of
Paracord?
Thank you. All right, a little piece of paracord. Take that, just keep a roll of it in your pack, and then cut off what you need for the camera, and then it's going to secure that camera just fine. It's not going to secure it as good as the strap, but if you're having trouble with theft, or if you think that might be an issue, that's something else that I like to do. But hanging them up high, replacing that strap with paracord, that's going to be what you do to avoid most of the theft issues.
So speaking of issues, let's roll into some of these troubleshooting tips you got here. Firmware updates. That's a big one that a lot of people overlook. I know that even at times I've not made my proper updates, but let's rock and roll with this troubleshooting.
Yeah. General issues, again, like you said, it's usually a firmware problem. Firmware updates are just that, just regular updates that you need to do. Firmware updates, software updates are a little different, but just updating the firmware, making sure that you are up to date is going to prevent a lot of problems. So if you are experiencing problems, I would say, hey, update the firmware and see if that fixes it. If that doesn't fix it, then maybe you try something else. But that's one of the first things I would do, even before going to like a customer service or something like that. I would update the firmware, and even look at some of these other things that we're going to go into. Kind of check all of these off the box, and it might save you some time, and not have to make that phone call to customer service. And of course, if you need customer service is there. That's what they're there for. But a lot of these things we can solve on our own. And again, I've learned that just because I've made all these mistakes. There have been plenty of times where I did not update the firmware. So that really is one of the primary issues. If you're having some extensive problems that persist, firmware is going to fix it for sure. Faulty camera or false triggers. False triggers might be a bad PIR sensor. This is related to the Fresnel lens. That's getting a little technical. Probably doesn't matter, but it's going to be difficult to know for sure what was causing those faulty camera triggers or faulty or false triggers. But if you are having issues with the camera, I would say bring it in like into your home, and set it up. And then see, and like put it on a blank wall, somewhere nothing can trigger it. And then if it continues to trigger and trigger and trigger and trigger, then yeah, I'd say it's probably like a PIR sensor or a Fresnel lens issue. But a lot of the false triggers that we have, it's just because we don't trim enough away from the target area. I mean, 99% of the false triggers I get is just because of motion, because I didn't do a good job. The next issue, having like a pink or a red shade to your daytime photos, especially, could mean that there's an IR filter that could be malfunctioning. A lot of the times it's not, it's like you'll have like one here or one there. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it. If it gets to the point where like every picture is like pink or red shaded, that's probably when I would lean toward, okay, we've got a pretty persistent issue with our filter, and malfunctioning there. Dark nighttime images and videos, especially on the video side. If it's darker than it should be, that probably means that there's a depleted or a depleting battery source. You're getting low battery, and so it's kicking out that at the beginning of that video, you're getting good quality lighting. It's full power, full power as far as the lighting goes. And because that battery power is dropping off, it's low. You get a few seconds into that video and then boom, you start to lose a little bit of power. And so you're not going to have full illumination throughout that video if you have a low battery situation. Now, sometimes you will, a lot of times you will, but if that's something you're experiencing, it's probably a low battery issue. Go in, refresh your batteries, or attach an external battery source, and that's going to solve that. Same thing with a short video length. If you see your video length cutting out prior to when they should, so if you got like a 10-second video length going and it cuts out at 5 seconds or 3 seconds or 6 seconds, whatever it is, that's probably a power issue too. And then like no photos at all. Sometimes we forget to hit the on button. I've done it a million times. I've set the camera up, made sure it was field of view was perfect. Everything was right. Fixed my mock scrape, dumped my bag of corn out, whatever I was doing. And then I walked away and never even turned it on. So failing to turn that camera on. Fortunately, with these stealth cameras that I'm running, when Josh is running, they're pretty much, they're some of the easiest cameras to use. They really are. And that's a good thing. And so if you just hit the on button and it's got service and it's linked to your account and everything is good there, you want to make sure you wait, check, make sure everything, all green lights before you walk away, make sure everything is armed and ready to go. But hit the on button, It's, it's simple, but man, there have been so many instances where I just forgot to do it. So no photos at all. Maybe it's time to go back and just make sure that everything is working there. You got the on turned on, and make sure you got service, because let's face it, we hunt in places that are remote. You get good coverage with these cameras, but there are some spots where, the service is still somewhat limited. So that could be a factor as well. So just make sure all the green lights are go whenever you're looking at that, and should be good. Yeah, best trail camera locations. These are it's kind of like an all season, just kind of bunching it up. Certain spots are going to be better than others based on time of year, and we won't really get into that super heavy. But these are just this is kind of a generalized list. Ag field edges are really good. Before we get into this list, I do want to say that I like to deploy my cameras in one of three layers. So I call it layer 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, and C, whatever term you want to give that. But making sure that your cameras are in one of those three layers, and by layers I mean it's almost like degree of intrusion, if you want to call it that. So like a layer 1 would be well away from a bedding area. It's like on the food source, like an ag field edge. Layer 2 would be a little bit further into cover. Maybe it's 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, whatever. Inside of the cover, maybe it's a staging area that's positioned along a bed to feed line of movement. So you got your bedding area, staging area, food source. It's like a staging area, whatever that staging area looks like in that particular situation. That would be what I consider like a layer 2 or a layer B. You're a little closer to the bedded deer, but not too close. And then like at layer 3 or layer C, that's going to be really close to a bedding. Now you're not going to, completely invade, but it's really close to a bedding. So it's either on the bedding area fringe, just inside of it. Now, a lot of people, and it's really cool. I've not personally done a lot of it. I've done a little bit of it, but some people will find specific beds that these bucks like to use. Now, a buck's not going to use the exact same bed every time he beds. He's just not. But in certain situations, there are bucks that tend to use the same exact beds a little more often, or they get used by a deer. May not be the exact same deer, but they get used by deer with more frequency. Usually in those instances, it's because the habitat quality is poorer and they don't have as many bedding options. And so they are using certain elements such as, a downed log to, that's behind their back to, give them a little bit of horizontal cover. But anyway, if you find specific beds that are being used very, very frequently, you will see a lot of people that will actually post cameras up high, angled down at the beds. And I think that's cool. It's really intrusive and something you need to do outside of hunting season. So I would do that, like in the spring or summer, and get those deployed well in advance. But anyway, that's what I would consider a layer 3 or layer C. So whenever I find these locations, these best trail camera locations, I want to think about how intrusive it's going to be for me to go in and deploy. If you're deploying your cameras and it's a cell camera and it's attached to an external battery source, it's not as much of a concern, because you're going in one time and you're not going back until for months and months, if maybe not until after the postseason. So it's less of an issue if you're running cell cameras with external battery sources. But if you're still running SD cameras, that's something more to think about. And that's one of the reasons why, if I am limited on the number of cell cameras that I have to deploy, I tend to save those for more sensitive areas, for those layer 2 and layer 3 locations. And then I'll save my SD cameras for those layer 1s and 1.5s, or, closer to, because it's easier to check those. As far as best spots, ag field edges, that's going to be like a layer 1. It's a no-brainer. Deer they love corn and soybeans. They love milo. They love alfalfa. Yeah, the ag fields, no-brainer. Safe locations. You're not going to spook a lot of deer checking cameras there if they are SD cams. Bedding area fringes, layer 3, layer C, more intrusion. But if you're running a cell camera and you get it put out a month before deer season, or a month before you plan to hunt, I would still potentially do that. It's because you're getting that real time. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but I would say your cell cams on that Big Ten last year, they were pretty close to his bedding area, right?
Yeah, there was the one camera that really tipped me off to what he had going on more than anyone was like right in his bedding area, but it was on a community scrape that I'd actually found during turkey season. So I made sure to go back before the deer season and throw a camera on that community scrape. And sure enough, that was where he first turned up, and he was there. He was there so regularly in the morning and evening right away that I knew that he had to be bedding close by because he was just, it was like his first stop whenever he was leaving bed or coming back to it. And a lot of other bucks use that community scrape as well. And in fact, version 2.0 of that deer just showed up a couple weeks ago on that same community scrape. It's probably a year younger. I'll probably still think about shooting him if he walks by. But another really nice 10 point showed up on that same community scrape at almost the same time, same camera, everything. So yeah, it's that's the thing you got to realize if you're getting pictures of deer, real early in the morning, and then also right in the evening time when they're getting up to go move. If you're getting those images consistently, you got to be close to their bedding area.
Yeah, for sure. And let's be honest, a lot of people are, a lot of hunters are really conservative hunters. They don't like to hunt close to bedding areas. I love to hunt close to bedding areas if I think I can get in there and out of there without spooking deer. Because where do we kill? When do we kill deer? We kill deer in daylight. Well, where is most daylight deer movement? Closer to the bedding areas. Now, if they're making it all the way to a food source, a big ag field, then there's no reason to do that. Obviously, the safer play is to get further away, or even safer than hunting on the food source edge is to hunt a transition route that's between the food and the bedding area. And the reason I say that, and I did not put transition areas in here, but I did put staging areas. You can almost kind of think of transition areas, transition routes as staging areas, kind of not exactly the same term, but similar term. And, a lot of people choose to hunt really close to beds or really close to food sources. Both are good plays in their own right, depending on the situation, if you can get good entry and exit. But an even safer play and just as almost as effective play is to hunt a transition route between the two, especially if you know what the exact line of movement is. If you know what trail or few trails your target deer is using or most of the deer herd uses, you can get in there and hunt that transition route. And the big reason why it's so effective is because you're going to preserve the quality of the hunting on the property longer than you will hunting right on the edge of the bedding area or right on the edge of the food source. Because when you go into hunt a bedding area or come out or go into hunt a food source and come out, one of those two for each is going to be a high risk situation where you're going to likely bump deer. So like if you're going to hunt a bedding area of a morning, when you go in, you're more than likely, if you get in early enough, there's not a huge risk because deer are still off feeding. But when you go to leave come lunchtime, you're in there with them, so it's difficult to get out. Vice versa, you can't really get into a bedding area in the afternoon without bumping a bunch of deer out. So it's really not even a factor unless you have dynamite access. So like if you've got like a drainage ditch that runs all the way to the base of your tree stand and like the deer can't see you visually coming in. Deer hunting is so situational. So like every hunt is different. And so we talk about all these things in terms of rules, and they are true that they are rules, but there's exceptions to those rules. So like, for example, I would normally not go in midday and hunt a bedding area afternoon. But if you've got like a really good ditch that goes all the way to the base of your tree and you can climb up that tree without deer seeing, that's an example where I would potentially maybe try to hunt a bedding area in the afternoon. But I digress. So moving on. So on the opposite side, on a food source, when you're putting, if you're hunting there, and again, I'm getting off topic here. I'm gonna have to round myself up. But when you go in of an afternoon, like if you go in of a morning to hunt a food source, you risk bumping deer. If you go in of an afternoon, you're not. But when you get done with the afternoon hunt, you're risking bumping deer. So putting trail cameras or actually hunting those spots for an actual sit, transition routes are safer because you're catching deer passing. You're not catching deer congregating. So I'm going to move on because I really got on a tangent there. But benches, there's some good spots too. Saddles. we're funnels, food plots, inside field corners, leeward ridges, pinch point saddles, scrapes, mock scrapes, staging areas, trail intersections. These are all spots that we're going to go over here in just a minute in a little bit more detail. We've already talked about ag field edges, but as you can see, and we've already obviously talked about bedding area fringes too, but both of these are instances where point A, again, same as my trail cameras, I like to think of deer movement in stages. So like we had the layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 mentality of trail cameras that directly applies to point A, point B, point C of deer movement. So you've got point A as a bedding area, point C is food source, point B is in the middle. When you're putting your trail cameras out, I have the same mentality of trail camera deployment as I do trying to intercept deer movement as a hunter in a hunting situation. I try to put my trail cameras in spots that I would actually sit and hunt, especially if I have a limited number of cameras. Just because, again, what are you trying to do? You're trying to collect intel on that deer or the deer herd, and your best spots to do that are going to be the same spots that you probably hunt a deer, or at least close to it. It may not be the exact same tree, but it's going to be in the exact same generalized area. Yeah, so we've covered bedding area fringes and food sources, or excuse me, bedding areas and food sources pretty heavily. Two really good ones, and I hunt a lot of hill country. I hunt Kentucky, I hunt Ohio. Ohio is where I hunt most of that hill country, but there's some hills here in Kentucky too. Benches and saddles are both really good. So as you can see here on the left, this is kind of it's a loose bench. It's not as defined of a lot as a lot of benches are. So a lot of benches you'll see that they have the exact same width throughout that bench. They're going to be very similar. This one's a little more loose, but it still qualifies as a bench. It's not the purest example, but this is one that definitely serves a purpose. And so what you can see is you have on the top side of that map, you've got a ridge line that kind of runs. It's kind of like runs northwest to southeastish, west to eastish. Eastish. It's a little bit off there, but you've got that bench that runs on the south side of that ridge. Deer love benches. They will bed on those. They will travel along those. If there's oaks there and food sources, they'll feed along those. It's just in hill country, these are king. Now, if they are bedding along these, I tend to put them on one end of that bench or the other. I don't like to put them right in the middle. Or I'll find, because a lot of the times in hill country on these benches, you'll see defined trails where they go up the ridge. And there might only be, in a situation where you see, like you see here in the picture, there might only be 2, 3, at most 4 trails that cut vertical off that bench to the top of that ridge. And so other good options for cameras is to find those, especially if they're bedding along those. If they're just traveling, if it's just a travel route, on the bench is best. But if they're bedding along that bench, find those vertical trails that are going up, and some of them are vertical, like they go straight up. And so if you've got the camera that's angled on those, you can catch a lot of really good movement. Saddles is good too. Saddles are good too. You can see it on the right-hand side of the screen. That's again, the best way to find those on maps is where you're going to see 2 circles. It's going to be like a figure 8, unattached figure 8 situation there. And what that signifies is you've got 2 peaks, and then there's like a low spot between those. And so these deer will travel through those spots. This is a little bit less defined example. There's a lot more, sharper examples of that, but you get the point. Feed stations. Let's face it. About half the states in the country allow you to feed deer. I feed deer. A lot of the people, you look at Texas, you look at Kentucky, you look at Ohio, you look at a lot of states, and that's part of the culture, and that's great. That's fine. If you can do it, do it. If you don't, obviously. But feed stations are excellent spots for cameras. So you can see right here, you can see the outline of a property line. Deer are probably going to be bedding off to the east based on the timber here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with hunting this property. No, you don't have deer bedding on that property, but you still have access to the property. And the property I'm talking about is everything to the left of this yellow property line. So more than likely, deer are going to be bedding on the neighbors. you know, or other areas. They might bed down here to the south where the timber gets a little bit thicker on the property. But this is a situation where you can run a feed station, or run a bait pile or whatever it is, and that's going to be an excellent spot for a camera in a situation like this. And let's face it, if you hunt small tracts, and this would be like a small tract example, you don't have everything for the deer. A lot of times, and I hunt some of these properties. You either A, have the bedding cover, B, have the food. Rarely do you have both. And that's going to be the case for a lot of properties that are 50 acres or less, even sometimes 100 acres or less. So you've got to think about, okay, well, what do I offer the deer in this particular situation? You don't offer the bedding areas. You can't offer that. It's not possible because it's almost all field. So what can I do? Well, I can either A, plant some food plots out here in these fields, run a feed station, or do both. So while the neighbor, they hold most of the deer during daylight, while they're bedded, that's the case. That's their strength. Your strength in this situation is going to be offering the food. Now, hopefully you have a good relationship with that neighbor and you work together and you help each other succeed. But that's an example where obviously food is going to be strength. On that particular example scenario, I would probably do a feed station, food plot combination, whatever your regulations allow. Food plots, next thing. So we've got this area here. You can see the outline of the property line. You can see some cut over timber where there was a fairly recent, within the past couple of years. You can see there in the middle of the screen where it was harvested. Neighboring properties, they've got some timber that hasn't been harvested in probably 20 years. Just by the looks of it, you can see where it's been thin. That was a select cut. So down here in the southeast corner of that, the eastern side of that property, the deer are primarily bedding in that thick stuff because it's really thick. Now, this time of year, I should say, early season, they're not going to bed in that as much because they like to have open canopy before hunting pressure really ramps up. Summer, early season, they're probably going to bed where that stuff's not as thick, unless it's just an uber mature deer. But once hunting pressure ramps up, they're probably going to recede back into all this thick stuff. And having these food plots on the exteriors of those are going to allow you to obviously have good hunting scenarios, but they're going to be really good trail camera locations as well. Inside field corners, this is not the purest form, but you can see down here in the southwest corner where you've got the two trail camera icons and then the tree stand icons, kind of right in the south central part of the screen here. That is not the truest form of an inside field corner. The truest form you would see, you have the timber that goes north and south on the west side. Then that timber would expand across the south end, the bottom portion of that, and create an L shape. However, this spot right here is still technically an inside field corner. And this is the reason that I wanted to use this example. You don't have to have L-shaped timber to get inside field corner. You can have a situation like this where you have timber that runs north to south. Then you've got a little stretch. There is a little stretch where it creates an L right there where those cameras and that stand is located. But it's also a big, long fence row that runs east to west. And a lot of that stuff that's on the south side of that fence row is kind of grown up and is more covered. So it creates an inside field. Inside field corners, deer love those. They come out right there from multiple directions. It's just kind of, it's not a pinch point, but it kind of acts as a funnel, kind of acts as a pinch point. So it's a great trail camera location as well.
The other thing about inside field corners, and I know we're going to get to 360 here pretty soon, but I actually shot a Huntstand tips and tactics video about this that isn't out yet. We haven't gotten around to editing it, but those inside field corners are a great spot for the 360 camera, because a lot of times what I'll see with those corners is there'll be a main trail coming right out of the corner, and you'll see a lot of does and fawns and younger bucks coming out of that main trail. But those older bucks, 3 years and older, oftentimes will completely avoid that main trail and they'll sneak around the sides and they'll pop out somewhere else that's within radius, probably even within shooting distance of that corner, but not right at the corner. So when they do that, you can catch them slipping on that 360 camera because it's going to get them no matter where they're at. So it's another thing to consider with the 360s, because those inside field corners are just natural attractants to deer, but a lot of times not necessarily the deer that you want to shoot.
For sure. And so you want your cameras on those main trails because, you know, a lot of the deer are going to be hitting those main trails, but you want to be able to catch those secondary trails too. And the only way to do that is either A, to have a bunch of cameras in one location, or have a 360 camera. Like you said. So, another two more really good spots. Ridges. I love ridges. Hill country is my favorite. I would rather hunt hill country than flat ground any day of the week. Now, I love hunting all different types of habitat, types of topography, terrain. That's one of the things I love about deer hunting, is being able to hunt different types of places, because everywhere hunts differently. And so you're constantly learning new things. But ridges, if I had to pick one, it would be hill country. And so, again, reining myself back into trail cameras, you can see here that you've got basically the high ground, the highest point, highest elevation is up here on the northernmost area of this screen grab. But you've got a ridge that kind of runs, and there's some fingers that split off of it, but there's a ridge that kind of runs north to south. And so when you're looking at that, you can say, okay, you've got slopes on the west side, you got slopes on the east side. Deer use ridges. A lot of times they're bedding along the top thirds or the bottom thirds, depending on the situation. They don't always bed at the top third, but a lot of the times they do, especially later in the season, especially later in the year, whenever it gets A, colder, and B, less cover. But even if they're not bedding right there along those leeward ridges, as we call them, and for those who are unfamiliar with the term, leeward just means downwind side. So it's going to be the downwind side of the prevailing wind. So if, in this example, if you've got that north to south ridge line and you got a westerly wind, you've got the westerly wind coming over the ridge, and then you got the deer more than likely bedding on the eastern side of that ridge. Now, I'll credit Dan Infalt. He's the individual that I learned that term from many, many years ago. I have talked with Dan Infalt a lot. He's taught me a lot about deer hunting, interviewed him for a lot of articles. So I give credit where credit is due. That's where I first learned that term. I think I don't know if he coined it, but he's one of the first that I heard use it in the outdoor space. But these leeward ridges is where you find a lot of the deer bedded. So if you have that north to south orientation, you've got the prevailing wind is usually some sort of westerly, whether it be a southeasterly or southwesterly or northwesterly or due west. Most of the deer are going to be bedded on that easterly side. So you can come in and hunt based on that. But it's something to keep in mind for your trail camera locations too. And I like to plant my trail cameras on these ridge lines, especially if they have pockets of oak trees. Red oaks, white oaks, both of those are going to be pretty common along your ridge lines, especially white oaks. And that's where I would focus on pockets of white oaks that are on these ridge lines. Now you can see too, we've got ridge endings, and it's the same screen grab, but at the end of it down there, you can see with the topo lines that the ridge kind of tapers off. You've got some little finger, not true fingers, but you got a couple different finger ridges that run off to the east side there. And these ridge endings are really good areas for bedding and for feeding. A lot of deer will bed along these ridge endings because they can, again, use that leeward ridge. So if you've got like a northerly wind or a northwesterly wind, they're going to be bedded down there somewhere, probably along that ridge ending on the eastern side of it. So just something to think about there. Good spots for cameras, ridge lines, ridge endings, both good spots. Pinch points. This is a flat ground piece of property, pancake flat. There might be 3 inches of elevation change. But you can see there. Now, all these cameras aren't in pinch points, but right there where you've got that string of 3 cameras, that timber, that stretch of timber, that peninsula looking area might be 100 yards, 150 yards wide. Running cameras on 3 different trails. This is actually a property I hunt. So there's actually 3 different trails that run up the gut of that peninsula. And I've got a trail camera on every single one of them. And so it allows me to, for one, that's a natural pinch point. It's a big pinch point because it's 100 to 150 yards wide. But there's 3 main trails that they use to travel up and down that peninsula inside that timber. And so, that allows me to monitor all of the activity that's running in there. Those are the 3 main trails. Putting cameras on those trails that are on pinch points, just a good way to go about it. Scrapes and mock scrapes. Natural scrapes are best. Making mock scrapes is going to be second best. But again, it's all about condensing deer into a tighter space to try to get them into the focal area of that camera location. So, it's ultimately a similar concept as having a bait pile for your camera, except A, it's legal in more places, and B, doesn't cost as much money. And then staging areas. So you can see the outlined area here. Again, another place that I hunt, just using it as an example. This is actually where I killed the deer that I killed last year that I'll talk about here momentarily. I killed him right here in this staging area, and he was bedding up here to the top side of that staging area in the timber, and he was coming down through into this staging area that's outlined in blue, and he was feeding off down to the west to ag fields. And the ag fields, well, like I talked earlier, that would be like a layer 1 or a layer location for your cameras, or tree stand locations, or whatever. This outlined area that I see here in blue, that you can see here in blue, that would be like a staging area type situation. There's a lot of trails that converge right here. So there's a lot of trails that come from the north and the northeast and the east, and even from the south down here. And they all kind of converge right there. And so you got a lot of convergence for one. There's trail intersections, but there's also a water source there that I installed. I went in and dug a big watering hole right in the middle of that this off season. It wasn't there last year. But any kind of convergence is going to be good. And staging areas can be a lot of different things. It's a very loose term for areas where deer tend to hold up when they're coming out of their bedding areas of an afternoon. And it's kind of like spots where they pump the brakes a little bit. They don't really feel comfortable about going all the way out into the ag field in daylight or the food plot in daylight, but they feel comfortable, holding up in these areas. It's outside of the bedding area, but still close enough, that it's still relatively safe. They feel safe there. But staging areas are excellent. This is what like we talked earlier. This would be like a layer 2 or a layer B location for a tree stand location or a trail camera location. But they're excellent spots, especially if you've got some kind of convergence, trail intersections, water source, mock scrape, whatever it is that you're getting, via that camera that condenses them down in front of the trail camera location. But yeah, just another good spot. Trail intersections, I just mentioned that, but anywhere you have multiple trails, as you can see here with these yellow lines, where they converge and cross, make excellent spots for trail cameras, because you're ultimately minimizing how many cameras you need. So like here you can see about 3 different trails that kind of converge in a very similar location. They converge within probably 10 yards of each other, maybe less. And having one camera can capture almost all of that deer movement. Sure, it's great to have more cameras, but use them wisely. That way you can go and put them somewhere else. And so trail intersections are going to increase how many deer you get on your cameras, but it's also going to help you maximize the gear that you've got. Yeah, I don't know, Josh. Anything you got, or you want me to just keep it rolling?
No, I mean, you're kind of covering everything that I would say. You got me excited though, because staging areas are one of my favorite types of areas to hunt. I've had a lot of success, and when you're sitting in them, you're constantly just on edge, waiting for some action to happen. And ironically, I went and put in a water hole and a licking branch yesterday out in the field. And before I left, I hung a stealth cam in a staging area where I've killed out a couple different times. And we just didn't have a camera in there yet this year. And I hung it there yesterday afternoon. And yesterday evening, one of our better bucks showed up. So my intuition was right on. He was in there lurking around. And we've got a few other cameras around that area, including the field that you would think that he was probably about to go out onto. And we haven't had any pictures of him on those other cameras. So that's another thing that I'm sure you'll end up talking about later in the advanced teachings and tactics section. But Cameras are great, but they do not tell you everything. Not even a 360 camera can tell you everything. It's amazing how you can just be slightly off the mark with cameras sometimes, and you might have a deer walking around out there that's very huntable that you just still can't get on camera. And that one right there, yes, it's that's the fun part about it though. Like it still keeps the magic alive. There's the whitetail is so savvy that there's not ever going to be technology great enough, I think, to completely outsmart them. So cameras are a piece of the puzzle, but they're also not magic. So
For sure.
that's what I
Yeah.
have to
Yeah, we're realistic. We're genuine with you guys. We're not telling you that cameras are the end all be all of deer scouting. They're a part of deer scouting. You have to continue to do your in the field scouting. You have to continue to do your glassing from afar if you have the type of property to do that. You have to continue to do your hanging hunts and do your observation sits. You're still a hunter at the end of the day, but cell cameras especially are invaluable. And like I said, that deer there, he's a really big old 8-pointer that I shot in velvet back in 2018. He was on camera. I had some pictures of him, but right as the deer season began, he it was like he ghosted me. No more on camera. On camera, no more. And he really didn't change his pattern at all. So I actually didn't hunt the first few days. This was 2018, so I'm trying to remember all the details, but I didn't hunt the first few days of the season because I thought, well, he's gone. I don't want to go in there and pressure him, or I'm not getting him on any of my cameras, and so I didn't hunt the first few days. And I was fine. I was like, I gotta get in there and try to hunt him. He's a 165-inch 8-pointer, and so I finally got in there. Turns out he was really on the same pattern. He was just using different trails that were maybe 10, 20 yards apart and no longer traveling to where my trail cameras were pointed correctly to capture that movement. His A to B line of movement, A to B to C, was essentially the same, hadn't changed anything. He was just using slightly different trails. And so, like you said, a 360 camera would have helped me there, but because I was running single zone camera on that deer. Obviously, we didn't have 360 cameras to run back then. And I don't even think I ran cell cameras on that deer. I think that was just SD cameras back then. But anyway, I had cell cameras, but I don't think I had any on that deer. But yeah, just in something to think about. But 360 cameras, deploying these things are really important for a lot of reasons. You can buy more camera for less money. So, like the nature of the camera, it's 360. You have 6 different trigger zones, and it takes a picture for each of those in every direction. So you're essentially getting there are 6 trigger zones, but I would say you're probably getting probably 3 or 4 cameras in one, or probably 4 cameras in one if I had to guess. I don't know exactly how it would break down based on the actual trajectory, but you're at least getting 3 or 4, because you got if you divide it into 4 directions, and at best maybe getting even 6 cameras because of the actual detection zones. But anyway, you're getting more camera for less money. You're monitoring every single direction at once. Increases the photo capture odds of getting a trigger of a deer if it's within the detection range. You can get better coverage on some of those difficult to monitor spots. Josh was talking about inside field corners earlier. It's a prime example. There are certain areas that make more sense for 360 cameras. That's one of them for sure. You get better line of movement intel, and reason being is because when you're looking at so you get that 360 trigger. Well, if you've got a single zone camera, you've got one deer probably, maybe in part of another deer, depending on how far away they are, the orientation, all that stuff. But with that 360 camera, especially like right now, deer they're starting to get out of their bachelor groups, but a lot of them are still in bachelor groups. And so with that 360 camera, you're going to get a better line of movement intel on that, because you're going to be okay. Well, you got the deer that triggered it, but you might have a deer that's 90 degrees to the right, or 100 degrees to the right, back basically over the camera's shoulder, and you can see, okay, well, this deer is moving this way. There's another deer behind him coming this way. So you get a better line of movement as far as the direction that they're going. And that's really important, because that helps you understand where they're bedding at, where they're feeding at, in the directions that they come from and go to. And so you get better line of movement intel from a 360 camera, especially if you have multiple deer that are traveling together, whether that be does in doe family groups, or bachelor bucks, or a buck and a doe that's, in the rut, whatever it is. Fine tuning target buck patterns, that's a huge one. The details matter. So I'm not going to get into the details of it right now, but the deer, one of the two deer, I'm really targeting two deer right now. Our season's in here in Kentucky. It opened up this past weekend. One of them, he is bedding in a dynamite spot. I mean, he's bulletproof. Like I've already, I'm not spooked him, but I've spooked other deer trying to hunt him, and it's tough. Fine tuning how you approach hunting a specific deer is hard, and that's one of the most difficult elements of killing a specific buck. But whenever you deploy a 360 trail camera, you're able to better tune your tactics, your approach, your exact stand location to and make it more likely to be successful. So fine tuning your target buck pattern is easier with a 360 camera because it gives you better movement. Because let's face it, a lot of times, with a single zone camera, he might be circling from whatever direction before he actually triggers it. So he might come in this way, and you're like, oh, he's coming from the east on a single zone camera. But what's actually happening, he's coming from the southwest and he's circling in. And so you don't have the truest form of intel because, okay, well, he's coming around from this way. With a 360 camera, you catch him as soon as he comes into the frame and you see the true direction that he's coming from. He's coming from the southwest. Whereas he might have on a regular camera circled all the way around and come in. You're like, oh, he's coming from that bedding area to the east. No, he's not. He's coming from the bedding area to the southwest, and you wouldn't have known that. And if you were trying to go in the next hunt and figure out, okay, well, how am I going to approach this deer? And you're using like maybe you're using a just off wind, and you're thinking, oh, I've got the wind just off enough. He's going to feel comfortable coming in here, and then boom, you screw up because you thought he was coming from this way. He was coming from that way.
And that's a phenomenal point, man. That really hits on the essence of what this class is about tonight. Those advanced thoughts and insights. And yeah, that's an easy trick that you can get into, whether you're running a 360 camera or just a regular trail camera. Direction of movement it can be very deceiving because a lot of those deer are making circles before they go into an area, and they're coming and scent checking it and seeing what's going on. They're leading with their nose. They do it all the time. That's how they survive. And so I love that you shared that tip. Another thing I'll say about fine tuning target buck patterns, also relevant to a deer that I'm going after, actually, daylighted last night. Our season opens Saturday in Minnesota and Wisconsin. But this is a Minnesota place I'm talking about. And one of the deer that I'd be happy to shoot actually daylighted last night. He showed up on the 360, and it was very clear what his direction of travel was on the 360, but I hit the jackpot. And I know that you're gonna agree with me on this, but there is nothing better than getting the same deer on two different cameras within a distinct chunk of time, and it doesn't happen often, at least not for me.
Anyway.
Unless you've got the whole woods canvassed, it doesn't happen often. And sure enough, that deer passed by one stand where I got the 360, and 10 minutes later, he was 200 yards down on the edge of the property next to another stand where I just have a regular camera out. And so, I mean, you want to talk about being able to pattern a deer. Like when you hit that two camera combo, that's cool. I've never actually got a 3 camera combo where I've had a deer show up on 3 within a certain like distinct time period. I've had them obviously show up on different cameras over time, but like not where you're able to say, okay, he was here and 10 minutes later he was here and 10 minutes later he was here. Like that's pretty cool. And that also tells you that if you get them on multiple cameras in a certain time period, you're doing something right. So it's kind of validating, you're putting those cameras in places where the deer want to be. And that's important. And something that, before I forget, it's a little bit off topic, but the other thing, you might have it in your advanced teachings and tactics section, which if you do, just stop me. But what you have to realize about running cameras is you can learn almost just as much by what you're not getting in a lot of cases, especially if you know that there's a deer in the area that you've verified is in the area, whether you got them on one camera in one spot one time, or you've seen them glassing or whatever it is. If you know through other intel that there's a deer in the area and you're not getting it on camera, there's always a chance that it's maybe camera shy or just happens to be deviating around every camera placement you have. But you might just not be in the right spot like altogether on that property if you're only catching them once in a while, or you might be catching one of those deer that that's just that's kind of it's on the fringe of his range or his core area or whatever. But what I'm getting at is you can learn a lot from what you don't get on camera, so don't forget about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that information or lack of information is just as good of information, relatively speaking, as far as, deciding what your hunt plans are going to be. If you're not getting him on this trail, well, okay, well, he might be on a nearby trail if there is another trail, but again, it's like you're crossing areas off, the list. If you got your cameras on the property and you're thinking, okay, well, got cameras here and here, pretty well covered. If it's a quality trail camera deployment, the best possible trail camera deployment, and you've done your job with your cameras, as you said, you're basically crossing areas off, and so it allows you to really kind of, like I said, just fine tune your approach for sure.
Well,
Um,
especially different parts of the season or when they're on a really distinct like bed to food pattern, or when you're talking about like older age class bucks that are just wise and super calculated in how they move. When you're talking about ruling out areas, if you go in and you see obvious sign in an area and maybe there's a couple trails there and you're not getting much or anything on your camera placement, you could just be 5, 10 yards off. They might just be using exclusively or primarily that next trail right over 5, 10 yards away. So like it can be that much of a pinpoint thing, like where you can just be slightly off the mark. And that's why it's important to remember that you can learn a lot from what you don't get, and they don't tell you everything. Cameras don't tell you everything. But if you can hone in, then they're gonna teach you an awful lot.
For sure. And to your point on getting deer on multiple cameras within the same short period of time, that's one of the reasons that I do like to have my cameras in different layers. Because let's say this. So like some people they live and die by only having their trail cameras on food sources, food plot edges, field edges. They don't want to put their cameras inside of the cover because they feel like it's too much pressure. Now, again, if you put that cell camera out early enough, pair it with an external battery source, never go back again until after deer season when you go into shed hunt, it's not intrusive. But the reason I like to have my cameras in multiple layers, so layer one, food sources, layer two, staging areas, layer three, closer to bedding areas, is because it increases the odds of getting some of those multiple triggers in the same time, in the same day or within the same few hours or whatever that window ends up being, because that does give you a better line of movement on what that deer is doing. And so you can better understand, like you said, where that deer is bedding at, where it's feeding at, the transition routes that it's using between the two. And having those multiple triggers is less likely to happen if you just have them on food sources. It can happen if he's traveling down a field edge, scent checking, scrapes, but usually that's not going to be a daytime thing. That's going to be at nighttime thing, and it doesn't really help you that much other than verify the deer is still there. So if you want to get A to B line of movement and maximize your number of daylight or near daylight photo or video triggers, having those multiple layers, layer 1, 2, 3, food source, staging area, bedding area, fringes, that's going to help you to increase that odds of maximizing multiple triggers in a day. And like I said, I don't get many of those either. And like you said, you don't get many of those. I don't get many of those. For one, it takes a lot of cameras to do that. But two, even if you have those trail cameras deployed like that, and I do have them multiple in, like, there's so many trails in the woods, they don't use the exact same trail every single day, you know? And so even if you've got them close, it's going to be hard to get multiple photos, multiple camera triggers. But man, like you said, when you do, it's almost like it's a cheat code, because you're like, bam, all right, that's it. That's his preferred line of movement. He might not use it every day, but he at least prefers it enough of time that I've got, it's happening. And so, like I said, I haven't had a lot of those either, but when I do get them, it's money, and it
Yeah.
really is, it's something that you can't forget.
Yeah.
It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, you back to your point about your layer system, you gotta run them in layers, even if it's just 2 layers, but please, people, don't get caught in this trap of just putting them on field edges because you just learn so little. And so many of your images are going to be at night. And what are you actually learning from that? You're learning that there's a deer in the area, but you really probably don't have any idea where it's coming from, how it got there. And I mean, it's a trap that people fall into, no different than hunting field edges over and over and over and over again. It's like we have this weird human thing where we love to be able to see. You feel like you have better odds if you can see farther, and you don't want to be in some choked timber where you can't see much because you just feel like all your senses aren't working for you. But it's the opposite. Like they don't think that way. They don't want to be seen ever. So if you're sitting in an area where you can see constantly and far, like that's the opposite of what the deer wants. And that's why a lot of them are spending so much time out there at night. So you can't get in that trap of just putting cameras on food sources. It's almost, I don't want to say it's pointless, but it's like such a small puzzle piece. It's fun. The cameras are easy to check. You probably are going to get a lot of deer. Most of them are going to be at night. You're probably even going to get bucks that you wouldn't otherwise see with your own eyes because they're only going to be out there at night. But it's such a small piece of the puzzle that's you're shortchanging yourself if you only run them on fields.
For sure. And the last point on this list is on, being able, if the trail camera model that you're running allows it, being able to do an on-demand check, to see if something's right there in front of that camera, that can be beneficial. Now you want to check your local regulations. As far every state's different. I don't know, Josh, maybe are there any states out there that does not let you use your trail cameras in that manner that you're aware of? I can't really think off the top of my head. I know the verbiage is very vague and gray in a lot of states as far as what qualifies as a communication device or not. But what I would do, I guess my advice would be to consult your hunting regulations for your state and determine if you can use your trail cameras in this manner or not. If the regulations allow you to, maybe talk to your local conservation officer. That's what I would advise too. If you have a good relationship, I would talk to them. If you don't have a relationship with them, I would begin one, because having a good relationship with your local conservation officer is very important. I try to get to know all of them in the areas that I hunt, if possible. But yeah, if you're able to, using your trail cameras as an on-demand surrounding check can help, ensure that there's not any deer that you're going to walk in and bust out as you, again, you're not using this as a, oh, there's a deer over here, I'm going to go over there and shoot it. That's not what this is. It's basically, okay, I'm going to hunt this tree stand, but I can see if maybe there's a deer right in front of this stand location right now. It's traveling through. If I wait 30 more seconds or 2 more minutes or 5 more minutes, and I can let that deer pass through and then go get in my tree stand. So don't get us wrong here as far as the purpose of that particular tip. It's not about killing the deer, it's about not spooking deer, if that makes sense. Did I look? I think I lost you.
Sorry about that. I was just gonna say one thing we don't have on here is the benefit of using these cameras for security. There's a lot of different ways you can use them for security, even if you're hunting a shared property where you're not trying to necessarily keep an eye on potential trespassers. But if you're hunting a shared property, and sometimes people aren't the greatest at communicating, or they'll even intentionally
Okay, I found this on the
good old Siri.
Good old
Um,
Siri.
Anyway, they're great for security. They're great for monitoring human activity as well, is what I was trying to get at. So we'll move on to the next section.
Yeah, before we jump, like I'm going to use this. I don't know if y'all can see the screen, but you can see me. This is a screen record of my video here, and this is a 360 camera from this morning. And boom, I caught a buck slipping right around the back side. And that was just a video screen record of the photos going through the six different, basically the six different triggers, the six different zones. And as you can see right there in that last zone, my camera would not have been pointing in that direction. As you can see, it's some thick stuff right there, right in the corner, basically. The camera is really looking, it's not an inside field corner, but it's kind of like it, because it's basically covering like a 120, 100, 150 degree window. And so That deer would not have been on that camera this morning if I had not been running a 360, because he was literally coming around the backside. So just an example, just a real life example of how that actually is a legit factor. Deep dive on trail camera intel. So the biggest element, one of the biggest elements of, we've talked about real-time intel. That's a huge advantage of having a cell camera. The lack of human intrusion is another big advantage. But there's so many different elements that are really important for cell cam benefit, and some of these apply to SD cameras too. But when we dive into this, bucks have unique personalities. They don't have personalities in the sense of humans, but they do express tendencies, preferences, habits, stuff like that, that culminate into a perceived personality. And so when we realize that, we can start to go through our trail camera photos, but especially our trail camera videos, and determine what some of those preferences are, what some of those habits are. Maybe they're food-based preferences. Okay, this deer. So like for example, one property that I'm not personally hunting on, I do hunt it, but I'm helping somebody else this year. I'm hoping to film them shoot a deer on that property. There's soybeans and there's alfalfa. There's one particular deer that just absolutely loves the alfalfa. Now, most of the deer like both, but there's one deer, and it might be more about where he's bedding at and stuff like that. But this particular deer loves alfalfa. So they have different preferences. Another point, every buck tolerates human intrusion more or less. That's true. Every deer out there is going to be different. And you can take 10 5.5-year-old bucks, and they're all going to tolerate human intrusion more or less than the others. So they're not all going to react the same way. They're not all going to be the same as far as how they react to you messing up and accidentally spooking them. They're all going to be different. So that's something to remember too. Home range and core area sizes, shapes, all vary greatly. Again, 10 5.5 mature buck, 10 5.5-year-old mature bucks. All of them are going to have slightly different home ranges, slightly different core areas. You could, analyze all their, break down their locations, put them radio track and collar on. They're all going to act differently. Now, the common numbers, the percentages, breakdowns, all that, is about 650 acres is the average home range. Again, that varies greatly throughout the country. It's going to depend on habitat quality. It's going to depend on terrain, topography. It's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on the orientation of how the property lays out based on distance from food and bedding cover. Just look at the west. Deer travel a long way to get from bed to feed. Look at the northeast where it's really big timber. They have to travel a lot greater distances to find what they need to survive, whether that be bedding or food, whatever it is. Midwest, they tend to have the smaller home ranges, the smaller core areas, because the habitat quality is better. They have all of their needs in a smaller, tighter area, and they don't have to travel as far. But that's something else to remember too. Another thing that you and we're going through all these things. These are all things that you can learn from your trail cameras. That's why we're going over these particular specific points. The next one is that deer are reactionary, not calculative. A deer, one of the things that I learned, a lot of people think that whitetails are superheroes. They're not. Whitetails are not superheroes. Now they have my buddy Dave Skinner, he said this in a Facebook comment the other day. Give him credit. He said whitetails have a superhero nose, and they do have whitetail superhero senses. They do superhero senses, but they do not have a superhero brain. So deer are incredibly reactionary, though. The things that they smell, they got superhero noses, pretty good ears. They got superhero eyes, not like ours. They don't see like we do. They would fail a driver's license test because they don't see very crisp. They don't see fine detail at distances, but they do spot movement really well, which is why they look, you get the spotlight, glow in the headlight look at a deer when you're, moving around in a tree stand. They pinpoint movement, and they pinpoint sound really well too. And so one of the things that you'll see if you run your cameras in video mode is you'll see the body language of deer and how they react to their surroundings, and they'll react to stuff even when you're not there. They'll react to a raccoon or whatever, or a truck driving down the road, whatever it is, they'll react, and you'll see that. So deer are reactionary, not calculative. They don't see a ladder on a tree stand as like, oh, that's a ladder stand. There could be a hunter in there. I shouldn't go through. They don't do that, obviously. Now, they might eventually piece it together if you've got a trail camera right beside that stand location and you leave a bunch of human scent on it, or if you climb down that ladder and they see a human walk away, they'll start to piece it together. But it's more reactionary, not calculative. This next one I think is probably the most important. It's the most basic. People are going to look at that and are like, man, that's not advanced. But it's info strips must be correct. Now, fortunately, with cell cameras, they take care of that for you. I'm talking more about SD cameras here. Make sure those are set correctly. This is vital intel. It's the most basic element of trail cameras. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but it's probably the first thing that was added. Now, the very earliest trail cameras probably did not have info strips on them, date and time, but that timestamp is the most crucial element, in my opinion, of a trail camera photo or video. And the reason is this. So mature bucks, not every deer and not every time, but a lot of the mature bucks that I've hunted, especially the bucks that I've killed, have moved through certain areas with specific wind directions. So they like to bed in certain areas and travel certain trails based on wind directions when that wind direction was in their favor. Now, every deer doesn't travel with the wind straight in their nose, or every deer would be bedding on the West Coast and sunbathing out there in California or somewhere up in Washington or Oregon. But eventually they get there. But what they do is they use it to their advantage. And so if you've got a deer that's on your trail cameras and you've got enough data, enough, and you can really only use daylight pictures for this, in my opinion, daylight or really close to daylight. So maybe legal shooting light ended and it's within, maybe 10, 15 minutes before legal shooting light starts, or 10, 15 minutes after legal shooting light ended. You can use those. Like I include that kind of in my data collection there as far as what I'm analyzing. But going back and looking at the timestamps on those photos and videos and comparing it to a historical weather data resource, and for example, Wonderground is a really good one. Weather Underground is technically the full name, but a lot of people just call it Wonderground. Being able to go back and look at the historical weather data for that specific timestamp that photo or video is taken, and seeing the wind direction is going to tell you what wind direction that deer feels comfortable passing through there with. Now, it's also in relation to, okay, where he chose to bed with that particular location or with that particular wind direction. So it tells you, okay, well, he come through here on this particular wind. And again, that's in relation to where he likes to bed with that wind and where he likes to travel, what trails he likes to use with that wind, what direction he likes to go and feed in with that wind. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes with the deer that, if we have time. We're kind of running late, but that's because of my loud mouth. I ramble a little bit. But again, info strips are important. Go back and look at the historical wind directions for that specific timestamp. Modern technology can greatly enhance trail camera photo analysis. I mean, we've been talking. You're better to talk about this than me, Josh. The Huntstand integration. How important is that? Oh, I think we're muted again.
Sorry, I'm answering questions and responding to stuff, so I'm not. Didn't want everybody to hear me typing. I keep forgetting to unmute it, but yeah, the integrations like that are huge because the images are only a part of the puzzle, and then when you combine that with the weather data and your own observations, and then mapping data and using 3D maps and really trying to analyze, figure out how these deer are moving, when they're moving, using that whitetail activity forecast and correlating that with your images, all those things is it's all about putting the puzzle together. And can't say too much, but we will have some more integrated features coming down the pike sooner than later in Huntstand that will really allow you to take your trail camera images to the next level. So yeah, that it's very important to use all those tools to your advantage. One without the other is just not nearly as powerful.
Yeah. And then the last point I had on here, we've already talked about it quite a bit, so we'll just blow right by it, but don't just rely just on your cameras, and again, we've hit on that point several times, so I won't dive into it again. Yeah. So again, these are going to be things that I go through briefly, but these are, I don't want to call them a playbook, but they're almost like plays or very specific tactics you can use with your cameras. The bedding area soak, that's something that you can do with trail cameras, whether it be an SD camera that you leave it, let it run, don't check it, and then go pull it after deer season. Or in my preference, you get, because you get the real time in season intel, is running a cell camera with an external battery source in a bedding area, like in there. Like you want to make sure you hide it from the deer. They might, you don't, I mean, deer don't react to trail cameras in my opinion. But if I do put them in the bedding areas, I like to put them up a little bit higher, angled downward a little more, and less in their face. That's just, again, I don't think it matters, but that's just something I do. But letting those cameras soak in the bedding areas is going to give you really good intel, and it can tell you if a deer, because like I said, deer don't bed in the exact same place every day. There's a lot of really good interesting research from the different deer research facilities, groups out there, the college-based ones. So like the MSU Deer Lab, I think Georgia, maybe some, Penn State. A lot of these college-based organizations have really good data point analysis of radio collar bucks, and they can see that they're not bedding in the exact same spot every day. Now, a lot of these are big timber settings, and I think in big timber settings, deer are using more beds throughout the year than they do in maybe your woodlot places. In a lot of the like typical Midwest stuff, I think deer are a little more loyal to their specific beds when they're in areas that have a lower ratio of timber to open fields. So like your typical Midwestern areas where there's a lot more fields, less timber, I think deer are more reliable, more loyal to their specific beds. You get into a really big timber setting, such as like Ohio, Pennsylvania, places like that, I think they use more. And they, so that, but that being said, having these cameras in bedding areas is going to give you really good intel as far as where that deer is today. So like maybe you're going to go in for the afternoon hunt and you've got some cameras that are soaking in different, some cell cameras that are soaking in multiple bedding areas. And you say, oh, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. Boom, he goes by a cell camera that's in a bedding area. It was like, okay, well, he's on this side of the farm today. I'm going to go hunt, this particular stand location on this food plot that's closer to this bedding area versus, a food plot stand location that's on the other side of the farm. So that's a good play. The downward angle maneuver, that's not really a play, but it's just a tactic. If you have a deer that seems to be, again, I've not had a lot of experience with this, but if you have a deer that seems to shy away from trail cameras, or if it's on public land, or if it's in an area where the deer just get more pressure, so maybe they've had, more human intrusion, getting those cameras higher, angling them downward is going to be a little better play to try to get, deer can't, get their nose to the camera and smell where you're handling it. And B, gets it out of their line of sight. The blitz a buck play is something that I've used, and this goes back to the layer mentality approach. Oftentimes, if I'm trying to figure out the exact patterns of a deer, I will shift. I will take my full trail camera deployment. Say it's 200 acres, and just using that as an example, and you've got a deer that's living up in the northeastern quadrant of that 200 acres, and I've got cameras all over it. Well, if I'm just hunting the one deer and I don't really care what else is going on the property in his core area, I've determined I've got him on 1 or 2 cameras. I've got 10 cameras out, and he's up in the northeastern quadrant. Well, just take those cameras and shift them. Unless it's getting to the rut and you think there's fixing to be some sort of shift, whether it's a rut-based shift or a food source-based shift, like going from ag fields to oak trees or whatever it is. Just shift those cameras that are unproductive and get them closer to the 1 camera or 2 cameras that are. Video mode reveals things that photos cannot. Photo mode is ideal. It's what most cameras are probably going to be in most of the time, but you can learn a lot of things from video mode that you just don't get from photos. So body language is huge. You get a better, so like you can determine if a deer is more aggressive or more subordinate. So an example where that would be relevant is say, you get 2 bucks in a video, you get a photo of both of them. But if you had a video, you could say, okay, buck A just whipped buck B's butt. And then, well, I like the graphics there. That's awesome. Some firework action. So when you have that video mode, you can see that, okay, this deer is more aggressive, this deer is more passive. And the next time you're in the tree, you can see that okay, well, maybe I don't want to use grunting or rattling or whatever it is to to call to another deer if you know he's more passive and not as aggressive. Also, obviously, like we talked about earlier, you want to use that video mode because it gives you a better line of movement intel as far as where he's coming from, going to. Um, and so there are a lot of different game plans that you can use for bucks that evade trail cameras. Certain tips and tactics that you can use. 360 cameras are really good for that. That's really, really the big thing there. Using cameras that that are better at capturing a greater area, and that's a 360 camera. Another option is creating intel folders and profiles around specific target deer. That's something I like to do. So like I like to create folders dedicated to specific bucks. And most of these folders have multiple years of history. And I like to include primarily daytime, especially if you're getting a bunch of pictures of the deer. If you only have a few, and not, throw the nighttime photos in there, but creating folders dedicated to deer and making sure you stash all of the photos of that deer, or at the very least, all of the daytime photos of that deer in that folder is going to help you understand. And then when, say you start getting that deer on camera at 2.5 or 3.5, maybe you decide to hunt him at 4.5 or 5.5. Whatever the case, you can go back and reflect on that prior history. And of course, if you've got your trail camera photos integrated into Huntstand, it does a lot of analysis for you as well. And you can see a lot of really cool information via that, I'm sure. If you study it and have your trail camera locations marked correctly, you can go back and look at some of that. And so, yeah, just make sure that you're keeping all that information, because here's the thing: you spend all your money that you've budgeted for hunting on your trail cameras. Don't throw the pictures away. Don't throw the pictures away. Don't, just drag them up and drag and delete. Keep that, because that's all relevant information that you're going to use this season, but it's also going to be really relevant information that you use in the coming season if you end up hunting a deer that you had on camera in the past. Yeah, and so this is the deer that I was fortunate to put my tag on in Kentucky this past season, the 2023 season. If you didn't see that hunt, you can actually go and watch that on Huntstand's YouTube page. It was one of the episodes that are on there with the setup, is the series name. But this particular, so you get a lot more information from the YouTube video, and I'm so, like I said, we're running late, so I'm not going to go into detail. Go watch the video if you want to see exactly how everything broke down. But trail cameras played a huge part in the hunt for this deer. I had 3 years of trail camera history with him. I saw him in person quite a bit. But this particular buck, like I said earlier, I realized that he liked to come through that staging area with certain wind directions. So he was bedded up in the timber, but there were a lot of basically crop fields all the way around him. In every direction of the bedding area he used, there were crop fields, and he was probably feeding in all or most of these, I would assume. I don't know that because some of them were on neighboring properties. But what I realized from my trail cameras that I had deployed was that this deer liked to come through that staging area that I outlined earlier in blue. He liked to come through there with certain wind directions. And I would not have known that without trail cameras. And I would not have known that without matching up that info strip to the historical weather data, because I was able to monitor this deer in August when I put my trail cameras out all the way into the beginning of September. So I had like 5 weeks probably of intel there of daylight. And I didn't have a lot of daylight, but enough daylight that I could realize what wind directions he preferred to travel through there with. And so what I did was I went in with a just off wind direction and was able to capitalize and get that deer down. And I think it was after the third hunt. So that's kind of just a real life example for me from last season, how trail cameras played a pretty significant role in my success during deer season.
All right, so I think just about everybody who came into the class actually stuck around until this point, and I realized it's coming up on 9 o'clock. So we've been at it for almost 2 hours now. That's typically how these hunt classes go. We always try to shoot for an hour, but it's just impossible to cover all the information that we want to. And frankly, I mean, I'm sure we could go for another 2 hours easily on this, just because there's so many intricacies and things that we could get into. But I'm sure a lot of you are eager for the giveaway. So we're going to kick that off right now, and I'm just going to go right on down the line. We're actually going to give away cameras to 12 different winners, random winners, those of you who have stuck around here in the Hunt class. And so each of you, each of the 12 I'm about to name off, will get the Stealth Cam Revolver 360. We've talked a lot about 360 cell cams tonight. The Revolver is the first. Wild Game Innovations actually does have one now, and Muddy has one, but the Revolver 360 and the 360 Pro, great cameras. So you're going to get one of those. You're going to get a flashback, which we'll talk about a little bit here in the Q&A shortly. Deceptor Max and Fusion Max. So the following 12 people will get one of each of those cameras. We will contact you through email. We have your email from registering for the class, and we'll make sure we get those shipped out as soon as we possibly can. So David Burns is number 1. And Greg Williams is number 2. Jeremy Abernathy is number 3. Joe Winkleman is number 4. Nick Hundley is number 5, Hundley. Then we got Ricky McElwee, Mcelwee. And then we've got Sarah Lassiter. Help me with my count here. Does that put me at 8 or 7? You're muted, but
I do work. I don't do numbers.
We'll go conservative. If we end up giving 13 on accident, that's my fault. It's been a long day. So Sarah, we're gonna say you're number 7. Steve Sparks is number 8. Tyler George is number 9. Zach Ward is number 10. And then we got Patrick Dobson for number 11. And then finally, we've got JJ Carlson for our 12th winner of that sweet Stealth Cam camera package. So again, we'll hit you up via email. We'll get your information. We'll get those cameras out as soon as possible. So that'll bring us into our Q&A here. We're going to answer some questions that didn't get answered in the live chat. And we are also going to answer some questions that were submitted during the registration for this class. We're not going to go too long, but we will be following up. You guys will be able to get access to the class on the Huntstand YouTube channel. We will send out a link to that for everybody who attended. And we'll have a lot more content coming down the pike that'll answer a lot of the questions that did not get answered. So kicking into the Q&A, one common question that we got in the live chat and in the questions that were submitted before this class during registration, the big question about, do trail cameras scare deer or scare certain deer? And before you get into that on your take with it, Josh, I'm just gonna say one thing, and that's about that flashback camera that we're giving away in one of those prize packages. In that prize package for those 12 winners. That flashback camera is a white xenon flash camera. There were a lot of white flash cameras back in the day, and you kind of see you saw them fade off the market, and they got replaced by black flash cameras and infrared, that sort of thing. People were really skeptical for a while that the white flash was scaring a lot of deer. And I'm going to tell you right now, I know for a fact that the reason Stealth Cam brought back the white flash camera was because a bunch of very serious deer hunters were reaching out to Stealth Cam asking for it because of the quality of the imagery and specifically the nighttime imagery. A lot of really hardcore big buck hunters wanted a white flash cell cam. So I'm not going to say whether or not cameras scare deer or if they do. I mean, I think it's more down to the individual deer, and I'll let Josh get more into that. But I can tell you that a lot of people reached out to Stealth Cam and they wanted that white flash camera, which you would think intuitively as a human being, you'd think that'd probably be the most intrusive camera with that flash going off. I can tell you that a lot of people don't think it's a concern. So what do you have to say about it, Josh?
Yeah, I'm running white flash, those white flash camera right now, and I have not seen a single deer react poorly to it, even mature deer. So I don't think white flash spooks deer. A lot of people, the question was actually asked in another space very recently. The discussion was had: do cell cameras spook deer? I don't think they do. And they were talking more along the lines of like frequencies. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think cell cameras spook deer. And here's the reason I say that: I have not had a single, and I've been running cell cameras a long time, basically since they started, and I cannot think of one particular deer where I had a deer that was avoiding cell cameras and only hitting SD cameras. I'm not saying that it won't happen. I'm sure there's examples where that might happen, where it might play out that way. But I don't think I've ever had a deer that I had on camera, because I still run both. Like I run equal parts. I still run equal parts SD cameras, just because I like cameras. I like the nostalgia of SD cameras. A lot of times I'll place those along my entry routes to tree stands, just so I can have the joy of pulling an SD card as I'm walking in. But yeah, so I don't think they spook them. I don't even think cell cameras spook them. And if you think cell cameras are spooking deer, you better quit taking your cell phone to the woods when you go deer hunt.
That's right. Um, another question from the registration process that came in that I think I can answer here pretty quickly. Let's see, let me find this thing. Best way to keep the lens clean and no fogging. And we had a lot of these questions and debates going on in the live chat tonight, specifically as it relates to the 360 cameras. And I can say that I've been using Rain-X and it has worked very well for me. I saw other people mention that in the live chat as well. So if you're having some issues with fogging and whatnot, give that Rain-X a try. I know there's a few different types of Rain-X. I think there's one that's like specifically no fog. Someone in the chat said that that's even better than the regular Rain-X. So try that. Seems to be working really good for me. Moving on to the next question. Lots of questions about saturation. How many cameras should you have per X number of acres? Is there a rule of thumb, etc.? I'll let you take that one, Josh.
Yeah, I don't think there are a lot of people who will give you a ratio like 10 acres per 100 or 10 cameras per 100 acres, or 10 cameras per 200 acres. It's not about that. It's about the property you have. It's about adequate coverage of the property that you have. You might have 100 acres where, depending on the layout of, say you got a property that's 200 acres of timber, nothing but timber, and you're going to need more cameras than if you've got a 200-acre property and there's only 10 acres of timber. That's just a boiled down answer for that. But there's going to be situations where really what I would do is I would analyze the property via Huntstand, via your maps and your apps, to see, okay, where are all the pinch points? Where are some quality stand locations that I would hunt? And I would drop pins for each of those spots: good stand locations and good pinch points, good areas where deer funnel through tighter spaces. And those are going to be good camera locations. Now, there are situations where I don't have another camera within several hundred yards. And there are some situations where I have 4 or 5 trail cameras within a 100-yard radius. So it's really hard to answer from a ratio perspective, but I would just think about it in terms of adequate coverage and figure out, okay, where do I need to have a camera at? What does my budget look like as far as how many cameras I can afford? And then put out the maximum coverage possible. And so that's kind of my approach to it.
Okay, so another related question is if somebody only has a couple of cameras, and let's say they're hunting a property where clearly you could probably use more, what would be your thoughts on the best possible all-around locations? Let's say somebody only has 2 cameras to run. Let's just say, for sake of the conversation, that they're on 80 to 100 acres. Where would you put those 2 cameras?
I would put them closer to where I think the deer is bet. If you know where the deer is bedding at, or think the deer is bedding at, I would put those closer to bedding areas, because if the fewer the cameras you got, this is my rule of thumb: the fewer the cameras I have, the more aggressive I am with my cameras. as far as getting those cameras closer to where I think a deer is spending daylight hours. If I have more cameras, then I get more kind of relaxed, a little bit more relaxed. I put some of those a little further away, but that's kind of the rule of thumb, putting them closer to where you think deer spend daylight hours. And if you have no idea where the deer are at, then I would spread those two cameras apart, put quite a bit of distance between them, especially say it's all cover on the property. Spread them out, put them on opposite ends. And then over time, I would probably move those camera locations, even if it's a cell camera. I would go in and move the locations and fine tune the locations of those cell cameras more frequently than if I have a larger trail camera deployment, because you're balancing how many times you go in there, your human intrusion versus the intel you get. So if you have a greater trail camera deployment, okay, well, you can afford to let this camera off over here in left field be a little less productive. But if you've only got one or two cameras, you've got to be a little more aggressive, because you got to figure out, you got to have those cameras in productive locations. So that's kind of my rule of thumb on that one. If I only have a handful of, one or two, three cameras, I'm more aggressive. I shift their locations a little bit more until they become very productive. And then I think about it from that perspective. And I think my fire alarm is starting to chirp at me. So I'm going to step up here and reset that thing.
Okay, well, while he's resetting his fire alarm so he doesn't burn alive, there were quite a few questions, conversations related to scrapes, mock scrapes, licking branches, hanging hemp rope, all that kind of stuff. And this also ties into the question that we just answered about where to efficiently use cameras. And if you're going to be using a camera just about anywhere, even if it's in a field, the whole licking branch thing is unbelievably powerful. I don't think there's a place in the country where it's illegal for you to have a mock scrape, at least with a licking branch. There are some places perhaps where you can't use real deer urine products, but creating mock scrapes is dynamite, and it not just during the rut, but specifically with that licking branch. That licking branch is the most important part of the scrape or the mock scrape. And so it doesn't matter if you just bend over a tree limb where it's in range of that buck to be able to rub his preorbital gland on it on his face. It doesn't matter if you hang a rope, it doesn't matter if you hang a vine, as long as it's at that right height where that deer has it there. And especially if it's in an area where it really stands out, it's almost like they can't even help themselves from stopping by to check it out. You can throw a licking branch right out in the middle of a field, and those bucks just have a really hard time not going and checking it out. So that can work really well as an attractant, especially if you're hunting a heavy timber area where you're like, man, there's trails everywhere. Where do I put this camera? Create a mock scrape, or at minimum, create a licking branch. And quick little anecdotal story about that. Brian Murphy, our whitetail biologist, he spent years researching deer and spending time with pen raised deer and getting to know individual bucks and this and that. One of the coolest stories he ever told me was about this particular buck that was running around this pen where they were studying deer activity at the university he was working at. This buck would run around, and he could tell by its body language that it desperately wanted to make a scrape in this pen, but it was like the dots just weren't connecting. It was like his computer was glitching in his brain, because he's like, I don't have a licking branch, so I can't make this scrape. And so sure enough, Brian came into work, threw a stick like you would to a dog over the fence into this deer pen, and it wasn't even suspended or elevated off the ground. But that buck no sooner than found that stick and started licking on that stick, rubbing his glands on that stick, and he started making scrapes. And he even carried that stick around like a dog and made scrapes with that stick. All he needed was that for the cue for him to actually make those scrapes. Otherwise, he couldn't figure out what to do. So that is how important the licking branch is for a scrape. And you can use them with trail cameras, whether they're in the woods or they're out in the field. I got several of them running right now, and usually within 24 hours to 3 days, you're going to have a buck on it once you put it out. It might start out at night, but as soon as those scent profiles start to build with all those deer visiting that thing, that's how they communicate. It's just no different than like going into a phone booth. They go there and they check and see what's going on in the area, who's around, and I can't say enough about that. So a couple more questions, and then we're gonna roll. It's already a little bit past 9. One person's wondering when we might, well, you specifically might bring them hunting. I'm not sure if that's on the table, but
Well, I do my best, but I'll try to dive into the comments. I'm not sure who asked the question, but I will say this: I do try to take a few people, at least a couple new hunters each year. Part of what I do is to try to introduce a couple of new people to hunting each year. I enjoy that, but it's also, for hunter recruitment, to give back to the heritage. So that is something I try to do each year, both during turkey season and deer season. So.
for sure. Let's see here. I'll pull up one more good question. Man, we covered so many of these. That's how good your presentation was, Josh. We covered a lot of this stuff. This one we sort of covered, but we'll end with this because it's important for people to really think about, and it's the question of how often can you safely check your cameras. And with cell cams, with an external power supply, with a camera that's functioning properly, the answer should be simple. It should be, you should never check the camera. You should never lay down any unnecessary scent trail. But how often do you think you safely can check cameras? Let's just say, for the sake of the conversation, cameras that are on edges, like field edges, and then those that are further into the interior of the woods, 2 different scenarios. First of all, maybe how safely can you check them, or how often? But maybe even more importantly, what strategy should you use to check them? What should you be doing? When should you be going in there? How should you be going in there? Like, what's just no different than going to a stand. What's your entrance and exit strategy for checking these cameras?
Yeah, a deer can't tell the difference between a hunter who's going in to check a camera and a hunter who's going in to kill them. So that's why it's so important to be smart with your trail camera use, and why cell cameras are so important and vastly superior to SD cameras for so many reasons. That in that real-time intel is vital, but the lack of human intrusion is what it's really about. And so if you're going in to either replace batteries and maybe a cellular camera, but if you're like pulling cards on an SD camera, the answer varies in my opinion. I think, like you talked about, the different layers. So like if it's a food source, you can afford to go in and check those a little more often. I would always check a food source camera at midday, like 10 to 2 is kind of the rule of thumb. Go in on times when you think that the deer are not going to be on their feet. Maybe it's blistering hot. Maybe it's in the middle of a hard rain. Whatever the case, just try to be there when deer aren't. It kind of boils down to that simple: be there when deer aren't. I do like to check cameras, SD cameras, on something I used to do. Don't do it a lot now because I don't check as many of them. But back when I was running only SD cameras, I would find rainy days to check my cameras, and then I would drive, a 4-wheeler in. If I could get to it with an ATV or a truck or something like that. If it's on a farm, drive a tractor in. A big part of staying off a deer's radar is matching whatever they're used to. So if they're used to seeing ATVs from the landowner, use an ATV. If they're used to seeing pickup trucks, use a pickup truck. If they're used to seeing a tractor, use a tractor. So matching whatever activity they're used to is vital. The cameras that are further back, maybe they're in that layer 2, layer 3, they're in staging areas or bedding areas. Honestly, I wouldn't put SD cameras in a bedding area because you're going to do more harm than good there, unless you're soaking that camera. So therefore, soaking meaning you are placing that camera for the duration of hunting season, and you're not going to, maybe you put it up in August or July, and you don't go back in there to actually pull the card until March when you're shed hunting or whatever. So if you're going to put them in really close to where deer bed, I wouldn't be going in to pull cards. If you're going to put it in a staging area, the times that I like to do that, so like stand locations, maybe you do have a SD camera in a spot where you on a fringe of a bedding area. In these really sensitive areas or more sensitive areas, such as bedding area, fringes, and staging areas, I would probably check those cameras when I go in to hunt those locations. So if you're going to go in and hunt a spot, and you've got a camera that's, just, 10, 20, 30 or 50 yards away, and you think you can get to that camera without spooking deer, without deer seeing you or hearing you, smelling you, it's worth it going over there and pulling that card, because the extra distance that you go, or ground scent that you put down or whatever, is probably worth, that little bit of additional human intrusion.
That was great, man. I'll only add one thing to it, and it's something I haven't done myself, but I know other people who have, and that is if you are confident that deer are going to some sort of destination, whether it be a food source or whatever, that they're getting up and they're leaving an area. I know some people will go out and check their cameras in the middle of the night if they have to, just to be sure that those deer aren't around. So we're going to call that quits on the Q&A. We still have almost 100 people here after over 2 hours. We really, really appreciate everybody who joined us tonight. The chat was on fire. Everybody was super respectful, super nice. Tons of great engagement, and people helping each other out in there. We tried to answer everything else that we could, either in the chat or at this Q&A at the end. Like I said, lots of content coming down consistently from Huntstand. Check out the field notes section of our website at huntstand.com. Please check us out on social media, Huntstand on Instagram and Facebook, and even on TikTok. And then our YouTube channel, we have a wealth of information on there and some really cool video content and some great hunts that'll be coming down the pike the rest of the season. So everybody be safe out there. Hopefully you learn something to connect on a big buck or put some meat in the freezer. We'll see you soon.